All right, welcome back to Conscious Construction, the Conscious Enneagram podcast. I'm Abby Robbins.
And I'm Kimberly Culbertson.
And today we are talking about the stances
Yes.
in relationships.
Yes, we are. Now, we've already done an episode about stances, so if you were with us last season, you have already seen our episode where we really dug into what centers were repressed for each stance, and we went through talking about the types. In this episode, we are going to look at each stance in relationship specifically.
And we're going to talk about, if you are in this stance, what your work looks like in relationship. Again, this could be your intimate partnership, your marriage, it could be a kid relationship, it could be with your parents, it could be with your siblings, it could be with your coworkers, your friends, any kind of relationship. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about what your work in relationship is, and if you're not in that stance, how you can support the person that you're in relationship with who is in that stance. So kind of taking some of the same framework that we've used in the previous episodes, but we're going to apply it specifically, goodness, to stances, because there is so much to understand about how you show up in relationship based solely on your stances.
Yes, and I think stances are so good that even outside of Enneagram coaching, when I'm doing work with business teams, I will talk them through the stances, even if they know nothing about Enneagram, because understanding that people interact with the world in a different way can really help you when you are in an environment where you're trying to partner with someone, whether it's in a family environment or a friendship environment or a workplace environment. Knowing the way that you interact in the world might not match the way that they do is incredibly helpful, even if you know nothing else about the Enneagram. So we're going to stick in these three categories. So why don't you give us the 101 about stances if people haven't caught stances in the past.
So the stances are sometimes called the hornevian triads, and they're based on movements that were observed by the developmental psychologist Karen Horney, hence the hornevian triads. And essentially,
I always think it sounds like a dinosaur. Hornevian triads.
Yeah, like hornevian.
Stances is a bit more, So stances as a language is a bit more accessible. But the hornevian triads gives props to the person who observed these things in the first place.
And she noticed that people generally will fall into three different ways of moving with the world. They're either going to lean in, they're going to kind of step back, or they're going to kind of move against. That's a good one. You have to tune into the YouTube video to get what just happened there.
I was just trying to embody the stances with you.
This is, in the Enneagram terms, this is based on what center is repressed in the type. And because the Enneagram is this beautiful 9-pointed whatever, there's 3 groups of 3. It's all pretty and neat. So in the first stance is the compliance stance. We have 1, 2s, and 6s. And then we have the assertive stance, 3, 7, 8. And we have the withdrawn stance at 4, 5, and 9. And so essentially you can either be compliant, meaning you kind of lean towards people, you move towards people or things, you comply with different aspects of either people or ideals. You can be withdrawn and you kind of pull back away from people or away from ideas and things. Or you are assertive and you move against people, ideas, situations, etc. Now, you can already imagine that 2 people that have different stances are going to have some particular struggles in relationships.
Well, and even 2 people with the same stance.
That's what I was about to say. It's that might almost be worse. No offense.
It's hard in any of them. 2 people that are withdrawing. I've coached couples who are both withdrawing, and it is a real challenge for them because they're both waiting. And people who are assertive are more likely to, get kind of into that knockdown, drag out, they need their way. And people who are compliant, who are they complying to if the other person's trying to comply to them? And so it's complicated either way. But knowing what you're working with on the other side of the table, that it is like a cheat code for a video game. It is so helpful.
Yeah.
And not in a manipulative way, but for example, if I am a manager and I am managing someone who is withdrawing and I'm an assertive type, then the way that I try to get them to do something might be very assertive. And the more assertive I get, the more they might withdraw. And so until I change my tack, it's probably not going to be very helpful. Yeah. And so what we're going to talk about today is how we kind of can unlock that.
Yeah. So let's start with the compliance stance. So we have 1s, 2s, and 6s. If you are a 1, 2, or a 6, let's talk about what is the work in the compliance stance in relationship.
Have you ever seen that movie where Julia Roberts doesn't know what she wants, and at the end she eats all the eggs?
Runaway Bride.
Runaway Bride.
Yes.
I think about this all the time for some reason.
No, it's perfect. It's so good. It's so good for what we're talking about here. Yes. Continue.
Okay, so basically, Julia Roberts plays a highly compliant person.
Yes.
And she keeps getting engaged to people and leaving them at the altar.
Yeah.
But then eventually, it's been a long time since I've seen this movie, but
she meets
they
Richard
talk
Gere.
to each other. The spouse, the like ex-fiancés, they talk about how she likes her eggs, but they all have a different way.
Yeah.
Then they're like, we know exactly how you like your eggs.
But the only reason you're learning this is because Richard Gere shows up and he's writing a story on the Runaway Bride. And so he's interviewing all her ex-fiancés.
Oh, yeah.
And so each ex-fiancé is saying that she likes a different... Clearly, y'all are going to have to go find where this movie is streaming and watch it.
Although we're spoiling it pretty hardcore here.
Well, I mean, we're not telling the ending. But anyway, so
there's a scene where this compliant person who has been in all these relationships where they say, how do you like your eggs? And she always answers with however they like their eggs. Yeah. And so the work for her is she's trying every kind of egg to try to learn how do I like my eggs?
Yeah. This is great. So when we're talking about the compliance stance, we're talking about people who have essentially... surrendered their own inner authority, their own inner knowing, and kind of like Indiana Jones swapped it for something else. We're just going to keep referencing movies today, apparently.
Well, I like
this
this
is the vibe. We'll just keep track in the bottom. How many movie references? And it's interesting because I think people don't often see ones as compliant. We talked about that in the previous episode. But ones have essentially surrendered their own inner authority and inner knowing for some sort of moral scaffolding that was given to them from somewhere else.
They have an internalized metric of how things should be done. So in this case, there's a way you should like your eggs. Yeah. Like the top chefs say eggs are this way. Yeah. You know? But it doesn't necessarily take into account their own experience or preferences. But it's taking...
That is all superseded because this is what's right.
Right. And with the other two types, they tend to outsource more in real time. Yeah. And so when they're trying to make a tough decision, they want to go and get a lot of advice and figure out what are people saying I should do. Yeah. And that is how they kind of vet their own wisdom if they're listening to it at all. Yeah. So I think the work for a compliant type, for a person who's either a 6 or a 1 or 2, is to get away from people, sometimes literally and sometimes just in like an emotional kind of way, and actually tune into your own experience and your own inner wisdom, whether that is like, how do I actually like my eggs, or do I actually agree with the story about what is good that I was handed? Do I actually agree with what a good, I'm an assertive type, but I have a compliant wing. I'm a 7-wing 6. And I inherited a really strong story about what a good daughter is, what a good family member is. If you're a good whatever, you do this. And there was a time where I really had to step back from that and go, do I actually believe that that is what a good daughter does? Am I beholden to my family's picture of what a good daughter is? Or do I get to decide how I will be a good daughter? or if I even want to be a good daughter,
Yeah.
if being a good daughter is at the top of my priority list.
Yeah.
And so it's really a stepping away from the influences in order to really hear your own heart.
Yeah.
And then once you've done that, there's like you immediately step into a second gauntlet, which is, can you trust your own instinct? Can you
even
trust
in the midst of other voices and other opinions?
Yeah, like can it withstand the influence of someone telling you what you should do?
Yeah. Yeah, that is, you see that play out in the 6 in a really interesting way, because 6s are often kind of pushing and pulling around that fact, right? Sure. Like, where, interestingly enough, 1s are maybe more pushing and 2s are more pulling. Like 2s are drawing the information in, 1s are kind of pushing the information out on the world, 6s are doing the juggling. Like, I'm spitballing. This is happening in real time. But 6s are kind of doing that constantly, seeking advice, not taking it, asking again, not taking it, because they're like, you see the dilemma so clearly in the anchor type for each stance. Yeah. That the dilemma is that, oh, you don't trust yourself, so you don't know what to do with anyone else's opinion, anyone else's idea, anyone else's information.
But you don't necessarily trust them either.
Yeah.
And so 6s, the more than any type, I think you see them crowdsource to their own detriment, like too many people. So they'll ask 10 people, and they'll get 6 answers, and they are fighting each other. Yeah. And now they're even more confused. And so there's that push-pull even just in how they're looking for wisdom. Yeah,
so, 6s are maybe sometimes better than a 1 or a 2 at, like, kind of rejecting the voices of others. But they're doing it in an unconscious way that then spurs them to ask someone else instead of listening to themselves. Right. And there's a lot of work to be done for all the compliant types in getting really, really clear on this internal voice. And I think 1s sometimes think they have a better handle on it, but they're often just tuning into their own inner critic. And so I want to just offer to 1s specifically, like, there is a place where, like, you might have an inner knowing that is actually at odds with this, like, moral
with
scaffolding.
Your inner voice, your own inner voice.
Yeah, the like inner critic that's up here barking orders. Your inner knowing is often not in alignment with that. I would go as far as to say often. Yeah.
And I think 1s do not experience themselves as compliant. Yeah. And a lot of people,
don't
especially
experience them as compliant.
If you're at odds with a 1, then you definitely are not experiencing them as compliant, because they are rigid in the things that they believe and the way things should be done. Yeah. So that doesn't feel compliant. It's hard to move them. Yeah.
But they only believe that things should be that way because they've internalized this external thing.
Yeah. And so for 1s, it's even more, I think it's harder work, because you're not just trying to figure out how you like your eggs. You're trying to figure out why you think you should like them a certain way. So it's like you actually have to get into, like, what does it feel like to actually like something?
Oh, that's so fucking good for 1s. Like, there is some, like, for 1s, like, you might like eggs in a way that is not the best way to serve eggs. Right? I think the egg metaphor is really, really good here for 1s. Like, you might actually enjoy something that is not the best or right. The only time I will eat scrambled eggs is if they are, it's called scrambled hard, which is basically like they're almost browned. They're so dry. See? But that's the only way I like them. It's the only way that I will eat them ever. Like, if it's runny or there's any, like, moisture, I'm terrified. No. But, right, like, that's an example of, like, you could have an experience of something and enjoy it deeply and it not be the right way to have something. And I think that that's huge for 1s. And then we look at 2s, and I think 2s are kind of the classically compliant type because they're just so tuned into other people's needs. Yeah,
their compliance is the most relational. Yeah. Because they're in that heart center. And so they're the most likely to comply to whoever is next to them,
Yeah.
as long as they want to be in a relationship with them.
Yes. Yeah, as long as they're wanting to be in a relationship with that person. Yeah. And so for twos, I often, when I'm working with twos, it's often like, how are you taking time for yourself? Right? Can you take 20 minutes a day where you are unavailable to anyone? Mm-hmm. And like 20 minutes does not seem that long. You would be surprised at the fit my twos throw at 20 minutes. Like, put your phone away, close the door. People can't text you. People can't find you. People can't call you. They can't come in the room, right? Like 20 minutes unavailable to anyone else. And it's hard work, but that is where real stuff starts to happen, because then you can tune into like what's really happening for you.
Yeah. And I think for twos, some of the work is to understand your own inner guidance enough to push back against the person that you want to be in a relationship with.
Yeah.
So like, actually, I don't want eggs. And that person's like, well, I really feel like eggs.
Yeah.
And you're
I
like,
actually don't even like eggs. Like,
so the two has to be willing to disagree and enough to like push and fight for the other person to consider their own needs. And that is hard work for twos.
Yeah. So if you are in relationship with someone in the compliance stance, let's talk about how we can support them in that. And it's hard. Like, I think there's a lot of, you have to create a lot of space for them, right? So like, if a 6 is coming to you asking for advice, like, don't give advice, ask them questions instead, right? Like, turn the tables a little bit, so that you're creating space for this person to really hear their own voice. Yeah. And the same can kind of be true for each type in a different way. Like, make space for them to hear their own voice, right? Like, don't insert yourself. And really, we got to remember that when we're talking about any relational issues, the problems that our partners or friends or whoever are having, 99.9% of the time have nothing to do with us. Right? Right?
Yeah.
So, like, we don't need to assert ourselves in those situations. We don't need to show up. We don't need to, do whatever. Yeah. You can just, like, create that space for them to, like, be there. And that's coming more from an assertive stance person. Like, I think that's my initial go-to, because I might be a little too in your face with those types. But I think if you're a withdrawn type in relationship with a compliant type, there is something about, like, they're good at creating the space, right? So, like, how can you keep that but also stay more present in the relationship? Because what can be really feared by any of the compliant types is like, I've asserted my needs, but like you withdrew, so that's gonna like that's gonna like re-traumatize me, and I'm gonna like go back into the same patterns. So it's like, how can you show up for them with this big, like, expansive space, but still like really remain connected? Because that's kind of the other piece of it, is they want to be in relationship, but they want to be themselves in
part
relationship.
Of how they feel connected is knowing what you want. So like with anything in the Enneagram, when you are supporting someone in their work, it is 1/2 making space for their type and 1/2 challenging their type. Yeah. Because if you refuse to ever tell your compliant person what you want, that's crazy making for them. Yeah. But if you always tell them what they want, they never are doing their work.
And you always advocate for what you want in a way that you always get it. Yeah. Assertive type folks.
Yes. And so as an assertive type, especially when I'm working in a corporate environment, a workplace environment, I have to be very careful not to bulldoze compliant people with sheer enthusiasm. Because as a 7, I will be very excited about my idea, and I want whatever I want. I'm very clear on it generally. And so it's very easy for me to fill the space with like a pitch about here's what we should do, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And then there's just no space for a compliant type to go, I actually don't like that idea. Yeah. And so especially when I know I'm working with someone who's compliant, I really have to, as a discipline, create the space for their ideas before I enthusiastically deliver on my own, so that we can have a real conversation and I can at least consider the things that they want. Yeah. And this is one of the ways where 7s, as an assertive type, don't always look assertive because they're just really excited. Yeah. But they're definitely being really excited to get you to do what they want you to do.
Yeah. So let's talk about the assertive stance. So we've shared how like you can support compliant folks and what compliant folks' work is. Let's talk about the assertive stance. So we have 3, 7, and 8. And these are the people that move against, right? They often move pretty fast. We are the feeling repressed. We didn't say this just recently, but compliant stance is thinking repressed, which doesn't mean you don't think, just means your thoughts aren't necessarily productive or they are geared towards being in line with someone else or something else, some other whatever.
Sure.
So assertive stance, sometimes called the aggressive stance, feeling repressed, moving fast, getting shit done, getting what we want, making the world bend to our will through sheer force or enthusiasm or just a real dazzle. For my 3 friends out there.
The dazzle.
So let's talk about what the work is for us as assertive types. In relationship, I think it could be summed up in one sentence, like, slow down and feel your feelings.
Wow, that sucks.
You were like, oh my God. Your response was like so real and visceral. You were just like, the fuck? Why'd you say that?
Why you be so harsh about it? No, but it's true. It's true.
Again, the Enneagram is not harsh. It's just incredibly accurate. Like, it's not, that was not mean. It was just right.
It's true though, because let's talk about the slow down piece. Like, that will get to the other terrible piece.
Okay.
But because assertive people tend to know already where they want to go.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of like hemming and hawing once you know.
Yeah.
Like, and for as a 7, when I don't know where I want to go, it is like an existential crisis. Because if I don't know what I want, I don't know how to move in the world.
Yeah.
Because I'm always trying to figure out, I'm going to this place, and I will enthusiastically try 20 ways until I find the crack and like find my way into the thing.
Assertive types are really like the fucking donkey with the carrot. Like, we've just got this like carrot dangling in front of us, and we don't care who we run over in the process.
I care.
We're just getting that fucking carrot.
That's true. I care, but I don't always.
Not enough to not do it.
I don't always realize I ran over someone in the process.
Because you're so focused on the goddamn carrot.
You stepped on both my feet, and I'm like, what?
Like, I'm so sorry.
The carrot is
but
right
the carrot, did you see this? And you're like dangling it in front of yourself. Yeah, like all 3 assertive types are always going after that carrot. And it shows up, that carrot looks different for each type.
Sure.
But you're just kind of always going towards it.
And because we are feeling repressed, slowing down automatically leads to the second thing, which is feel your feelings.
Well, it's like it's a cycle, right? So like the fact that we are feeling repressed means we can move much more quickly. And the fact that we move so much more quickly means we have no like direct access to our feelings without a lot of intentional work. So
they'll slow us down.
Exactly. Like feelings will slow you down. So we don't necessarily, in our types, we don't want that because we like going fast.
Yeah.
But feelings require a lot of energy. Like a lot. Like, y'all don't even know.
Sucks.
Like, oh my God. Like, you wonder how like 3s and 7s and 8s can do so much stuff. It's because we're not feeling anything.
You know what's funny is, so I'm married to a 7, but if we jumped over to like Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
He's perceiving and I'm judging. And what that means, if you get like really nerdy about Myers-Briggs, is that Ben is an internal thinker and I'm an external thinker. Okay, so...
I'm like, I don't know anything about this, so keep going.
You don't have to know, but it's just, I'm married to someone who takes a long time to say his stupid sentences. And then sometimes, sorry, Ben. Sometimes he literally stops speaking mid-sentence and he's continuing in his brain. He hasn't realized that he stopped speaking. So I have to ask him, are you thinking or are you still talking in your head? And then sometimes he's like, I'm just thinking, and he's mad at me. Okay, so here's what happens. I'm waiting because I'm trying to be a good wife and I'm trying to be a good listener, but he is like minutes of silence. And in those minutes of silence, I am feeling feelings and thinking thoughts. And I'm just trying to hold them. And then by the time he comes back, I'm in a whole different place.
Yeah.
because slowing down, anytime that I pause, I start feeling things and I start filling in stories as a head type. I'm like, I'm looking to attach meaning. And sometimes I'm attaching meaning to that actual pause that is wrong.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's hard for assertive types to create that slowness because it leads to feelings. And then we are in this space where we have to process something especially for the 7 that you've been avoiding processing.
Yeah. Well, and the reason why, like, we could just say that, like, that's the work, right? But I think it's helpful to look at, like, why, and feeling repressed, right, is yes, we are, like, literally repressing our own feelings so that we don't feel them. But what we're doing is we are shutting down our access to the heart center as an entirety, right? And the heart center is where all relating happens. All relating is happening through the heart center. All connection, all relationality is happening through the heart center. And so if assertive types want to be better in relationship, you have to start feeling some things, right? And that allows you not only, and this is the struggle, is like most assertive types are like, oh, like I'll learn to like slow down and feel someone else's feelings. Like 3s are usually pretty good about that. They're like, oh, I can get by.
Sure.
But you can't have a right relationship to what you're sensing in someone else if you don't have a right relationship to what you're sensing in yourself.
Yep.
Like, I can't put what my wife is feeling into the proper context if I am not dealing with my own feelings.
Right.
Right? Otherwise, I'm going to project shit. I'm going to make up stories, like you were saying, that like aren't real. You know, like you jump into this imagination piece. And so you have to feel your own feelings in order to really connect with someone else. And that's how an assertive type, that is their 100% their biggest struggle in relationships. And this is 100% the way to get there, is to slow down and feel your feelings.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you hit on is that part of what we're trying to do is slow down in order to feel their feelings, but assertive types, when we feel feelings, we tend to want to solve feelings. So we go like, okay, what do I do to change this so I cannot be in this feeling?
Yeah.
And we go right into action. And if we are not partnered in whatever the context is with another assertive person, the last thing they want is for you
to solve their feelings.
To solve their feelings. What they want is empathy, full stop. They want you to understand how they feel. And you, once you understand how they feel, as an assertive type, want to, let's both not feel this. Let's solve it in these 10 ways. Here's some options. And it can end up feeling really dismissive relationally. Yeah. And that's not what we're trying to do when we're in that space. Like, the last thing I want my people to feel is like I don't value them or that I'm dismissing their experience. But it is so easy for me to do that just because by joining them in their experience, I am now in that feeling too.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing. Like, you have to create a capacity within yourself to feel your own feelings so that you have room to feel other people's feelings. Yeah. And I think that's the big key piece for 3s, is that like they need to be in touch with their own feelings in order to actually sit empathetically with other people instead of using what other people feel as you know, ammunition or fuel for wherever it is they're going to go.
Well, or just input. Like, strategically.
Like data. Yeah, strategic. Strategic. That's what I was really looking for, because that's how 3s operate, right? They're taking in the emotional pitch of the room and they're responding strategically.
And not necessarily in like a negative way.
Yeah, like it doesn't, I mean, it can definitely show up and be a shitty thing, but it's not always, right? Like 3s, nobody around the Enneagram is automatically a bad person, right? Like I don't know how many times we have to fucking say this.
So many times.
So many times, especially anytime we talk about 3s. 3s, you're fine. Chill out. Everyone else, stop shitting on 3s.
This has been your public service announcement for the Enneagram.
Your conscious Enneagram public service announcement.
Okay, so what does it look like to support an assertive type?
Oh, man. I wish Danielle were here because she's had to do a lot of it.
How do people support us? I don't know. We're moving fast. We don't care.
I don't need support.
I definitely need so much support.
I know. I think that creating, I mean, in a lot of ways that we talked about, like creating space for the compliant types to kind of hear their thoughts It's about creating space for the assertive types to feel their feelings, right? Like, because what happens is you relate to people as they're showing up in their type, right? We get used to how assertive types move through the world, and then when an assertive type is taking space to feel their feelings, it's wildly disorienting
and
to
vulnerable.
Everyone.
It's very
deeply vulnerable. And so taking that with a lot of care, while also like not making it last any longer than it needs to. Right, there can be a way where certain types, especially heart types, want to create space for somebody's feelings, and then they want to just have all the feelings, and that can be really threatening, right? Because it's too much at once, right? So it's really about like, okay, let's create space for this, and then let's allow you an easy out when it's necessary, right? Because like we're not good at it. We don't have our sea legs, like we're still in our little water wings. We can't swim in the deep end.
Horse.
Yeah, just like where like 2s, 3s, and 4s are like, yeah, I can. Well, at least 2s and 4s are like, yeah, we can feel feelings all day.
I do think that what's coming up for me is in moments where I'm sharing my especially negative feelings as a type 7, there often comes a point where I'm like, okay, that's enough. I'm done. Let's talk about, and I'll just pick a different topic.
You do that a lot.
And I really,
like, non sequitur. I'm out. Bye.
I'm like, I have now hit my point where I literally cannot be in this vulnerable space anymore. And some people go, okay, and they'll just go with like, thanks for showing up for that little bit of space. And some people will be like, whoa. But I want to sit with this for a minute. And I feel like if you're not my therapist or like a very good friend, just go with me. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like that vulnerability hangover. I don't want to be in this feeling anymore. I showed up as much as I could. And because I'm an assertive type, I know like that is my limit. I'm done. And then sometimes people are reticent to let us be done. I know it's out of care, but I still need them to go like, okay.
Yeah.
You know?
I think a way that you could kind of balance that for those of you who are like, don't want to let that moment go, would just be to like, hey, before we jump off on that, I just want to say thank you. Can we take a moment just to like acknowledge and kind of put a bow on this moment and then move on? Like, because I do the same thing, right? When we get too tender, the subject change is so dramatic. Like it really is oh shit, like we got to go over here. Where I think if you're with somebody, and I think this goes for anyone, like if you're with somebody, even if you want to go with them in that conversation, just saying, hey, I want to acknowledge that what you just said was really big, really deep, really heavy. I appreciate you for that, right? Like, thank you. Now, what were you saying about, Transformers or whatever it was that you've like, transitioned into?
Yes.
I think that, and I do that a lot with my assertive clients, that it's like, I'm not going to force you to stay there, right? I'm not going to like drag it out of you, but I really want to acknowledge, because what can happen is that shift out of the feelings happens so fast, we almost don't always know that we've done it, right? Like, it's like, oh, you just said something really hard, and now we're talking about a TV show? Like, because it's so logical and makes so much sense for the assertive type, it's good to just circle back and be like, we're gonna go back to that TV show or whatever it is, but we're just gonna acknowledge what we've talked about and just like put a little, parentheses around it on both ends, close it off, and then we can move on. Like, I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And actually what, in that kind of a moment, what probably would be the most helpful for me is for someone to in some way tell me, it's okay, it wasn't a burden, like I'm grateful you told me that.
Yeah.
Because what I'm probably doing is realizing like I'm being too much in my internal voice,
Yeah.
Like, holy crap, I can't believe I said all of that. I need to abort the mission, Yeah. And so to like, if you are going to stay there, it has to be with like so much permission of like, okay, that was a lot.
Thank you for that. I
you.
appreciate that. That was, So that I think that's a really big way that you can create space and help people in the assertive type stay with their feelings without making them feel stuck in their feelings. Because that's the ultimate fear, right? That you're going to feel a feeling and that's never going to go away. There. Oh my God. The amount of money I've spent on therapy around that exact issue is...
My therapist gave me a meditation to like access your deep feelings, and then told me that when they did it, they cried for 20 minutes straight. And I was like, why would anybody ever do this meditation?
And that you want me to do this?
Terrible.
No, thank you. Yeah.
So it took me a long time to even try it because I was like, that sounds like the worst.
Yeah, that sounds terrible.
But it is, I mean, like, feeling your feelings really is the best way to functionally process your feelings. So,
who'd have thought? And
the amount of energy that assertive types spend pushing away from their feelings could power a lot of healing if they would turn toward them and stay in them. So I think the other way to support your assertive types is to not, when they are not in their type, by managing the room or managing the social situation, when they are the ones that need care, to just let that be okay, and even maybe not comment on it. Yeah. Because when people comment on it, for me, it throws me right back into my type. Yeah. But to just be like, I really appreciate that you're showing up in this way. I know you usually are really, like bubbly and smiley or whatever the case may be, or usually show up with a lot of intensity, or you usually feel like you've got all your stuff together, and I just really feel like I'm grateful you feel willing to be a little messy with me. It can really, really help that person's nervous system relax, I think. Yeah. And when I feel like people are like, what's wrong with you? You're not usually like this. Yeah. Then I will armor up so fast. Yeah. And then I will just assert myself away from that. Bye. Either literally or figuratively. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's great. Okay, so withdrawn stance. Yeah. 4s, 5s, and 9s, right? They're the ones pulling away. I mean...
So what does the work look like for withdrawing types?
I think in different ways it shows up in a sense of like... How do I want to say it? Like, I mean, obviously, like, taking action. But more specifically... I mean, especially more specifically for the 9, it's that like right action. Like nines could probably do more than 4s and 5s combined, honestly, but they're never doing what's theirs to do. Right? So it's like, it's really about, for the 9, tuning into what is theirs to do, right? Because they're body repressed and body dominant. So like they do have some access to the body center, and it'll run right a lot more easily than 4s or 5s will, but they're not necessarily acting on the things that are in their own best interest. Yes. Their own like priorities. So for 9s, it's really about prioritizing and then taking action. And for 4s and 5s, it's a lot more about taking action and learning to believe that your actions matter.
Yes. Yeah, I think for all of the types, they underestimate the effect of their withdrawal in their relationships.
Well, underestimate the effect of all of their actions. Not just the fact that they withdraw, but any action they take, they don't see how much effect and impact it has.
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, but even if we're talking specifically about the withdrawal, because they don't have a strong sense that what they're doing matters, they don't feel that they need to do it for the relationship to be good. Yeah. So, and there tends to be a certain amount of assumption that people understand the way that you feel, even though you're not backing up what you feel with action demonstrates that.
Yes. You know what? This brings me to something. This is a phrase that I've used with almost all of my withdrawn types in coaching, and it is show your work. right? Remember in like math class where like even if you got the
very
right
familiar,
answer, yeah.
Because Jack is so pissed about having to show his work.
Yeah, I was too, because I'm an assertive type and I knew the answer and I was right. And they're like, show your work. And I'm like, I was right though. And they're like, you're going to lose points. And I'm like, bitch, I got the answer right. But anyway, the thing is, because withdrawn type folks are so deeply internal, they're going through this whole experience in such a way that no one else knows what's going on.
Yeah, they have this rich internal life, and people want to know them.
Yeah.
But they don't know how to access them. So in relationship, that can be incredibly detrimental.
Yeah.
Because...
And then they'll like show up with a decision or whatever, and then everyone's like, what the hell? Where did this come from? And then that becomes a reinforcement of their own distrust of their ability to take action.
Yes.
Because the people around them don't understand. Right? Because they haven't seen the work.
And they feel like it's the action itself that they're responding negatively to.
Yeah, but it's not. It has nothing to do with the action itself. It has to do with the fact that they weren't privy to the entire process that spawned the action. And so it's really important for these types to kind of let people in on their internal processing, like whether that's more intellectual with the 5 or more emotional with the 4, or just kind of everything with the 9.
Yeah, I think the 9, it looks a little bit different because they are in that body center, so they have more action.
Yeah.
But it's action on behalf of others a lot, or action that can't rock the boat. So they're doing stuff, but none of the stuff they're doing
really
matters that much or feels vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so the action that sparks the reactivity from people is when they start to really advocate for themselves, which usually means they're also mad, like that their anger has come up. And so all of a sudden the person who's very go along is acting on behalf of themselves in a way that they're very angry at you. And you're like, but you were happy with me 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And so that showing up is a little bit different for the 9.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I think there's a lot to say about showing your work if you're in the withdrawn type, right? Like this is going to provide so much for the people you're in relationship with. And then just like, there's this piece of like a consistency to that, right? Like the more often you're like checking in, the more often you're showing that work, the easier it's going to be for the people you're in relationship with.
Because they're actually getting the opportunity to really know you. And I know for people who are in withdrawing types, especially the 5, but for all 3, there's a certain honor in being allowed in with a withdrawing type that is not really the same quite with like an assertive type or a compliant type, because they're aware of the energy it takes to relate and to let somebody see their internal world, and they don't just let everybody in. Yeah. And so just know that when you do choose to let someone in and to really show your work and to really show up fully as yourself, that energy is a deposit into the relational fabric. Yeah. It's not just wasted energy. Yeah. And sometimes it can really feel wasteful because if they stay in their own rich internal life, then they still are experiencing a lot of richness, but they're not expending that energy. Yeah.
Yeah. So how can people who are not withdrawn types support withdrawn types in relationship?
I think the top thing is to not fill every space with words. And this might be through my assertive lens, so I'll own that. Yeah. But what I do know from working really closely with some withdrawing types is that they have things to say, but they're slower to formulate how they want to present them because they don't have as much practice bringing their thoughts out into the world. Yeah. And they also don't want to fight you for the space to say it. So if you are one of the people, for example, who asks a question and then after like a beat immediately answers your own question, you'll never get to know. Yeah. Like especially a 5. But because they're like, okay, well, I didn't really want to know. Their assumption is you don't really want to know. So if you really do want to know your person who's a withdrawing type, you have to get comfortable with asking a question, letting there be silence, letting them think in real time, letting them pause, you know?
And in that same way we've talked about of like half making space for their type and half challenging their type, like keeping that pause, but then encouraging them to answer.
Yeah.
Right? Because there is a way in which, you know, like Danielle and I fall into this often. Like if we pause, sometimes if I'm just pausing, Danielle will be on her little emotions boat and float farther and farther away. And if I'm not like, hey, are you coming back? Like she would just keep floating. Like if I just kept the pause completely, then we've completely lost the thread of what we were trying to do or accomplish or get to. And so like holding this space of like giving you time to process, but then also that deep, rich inner world, it's easy to get lost in, right? So like you got to kind of like hold that cord, like you're going to let them go, and then you're going to kind of like tug on the rope and be like, you still there? You still alive? You still going to come back?
And I think in terms of the challenging side, to set some boundaries around like, I want to give you space to withdraw and to consult your inner guidance, and you're saying you need a break, especially if you're fighting. Yeah. But then to say, okay, we're gonna pause, but when are you coming back? Yeah. Like by this time, I'm gonna need you to come back to this conversation, and having some boundaries that you can hold them accountable to, and that they can hold themselves accountable to. Like, okay, I'm gonna sleep on it, but in the morning we are gonna
because
have a conversation.
if you just leave the space open, in a lot of ways that reinforces that them showing up doesn't matter, right? So you have to give them the space that they need to process, but it can't be endless, right? Right. And that's kind of work for, you know, the withdrawn stance as well, as like the space can't be endless. Yeah. Like you have to come back, and you know, if you're in a relationship with a withdrawn stance, you have to kind of tug them back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think when you don't come back, not only does that reinforce for the withdrawing type that their presence doesn't matter, but it creates a different storyline. Because like when people don't come back to me, I feel like I'm not important to them. Because as an assertive type, I would come back. I wouldn't leave something messed up.
We would have never left it to begin with.
So yeah, I mean,
the problem.
I'm gonna assert myself until it's solved. Yeah. You know, and so my natural inclination is gonna be like, I'm not worth putting the energy into. And then that resentment will build over time if you don't come back. And so both sides need there to be some agreement. And that goes for, we're kind of rounding out this episode, but that goes for all of the stances. Yeah. Once, especially if both people know, to have some agreement around how you're going to have hard conversations. Yeah. Is really useful when you get into the hard conversation, because you already talked about it.
And even it's not even always hard conversations, right? You can even frame it as like when we're getting into the territory that the other is uncomfortable with. Yeah. Right? Because it doesn't even have to be a hard conversation, right? Because it's not always a hard conversation with a withdrawn type. It's just deciding where to go to dinner, right? Like right? And for us, it's like it's not necessarily a hard conversation. It's that I'm feeling sad. Right? Like, you know, so creating space for these agreements in whatever the hard spots are, I think is really, really valuable. So there is some advantage to both parties knowing their type. But to kind of come back to what you were saying at the very beginning of the episode, this doesn't have to be Enneagram specific. This doesn't have to, and that's one of the really powerful things about a lot of these like inner triad sets in the Enneagram. You don't have to know your type. You don't have to know anything about the Enneagram for this to become really valuable and useful. And stances is some of that work. Conflict resolution styles is definitely a big piece of that work. Now that we've done so much work around the harmony groups, I feel that way about the harmony groups. I'm like, oh yeah, like I get how this is like really shifting things. Yeah.
And one thing about stances is if you're in an environment where you understand stances, but the people that you're working with don't, for example, you're a parent and you have children, right? Or you're a manager and your team does an Enneagram, you actually can observe even just physically and start to see, which is part of where all of this started in terms of moving toward or moving away or moving against. Yeah. Is an observation of even just like the physical movements of how the people in the stances tend to be in their body. And so as you are trying especially to mediate, like between your two children, or lead and develop a person in your workplace or whatever. If you can start to kind of observe and kind of think, I'm realizing that this person is probably compliant, then think like, what would be the most supportive to them? That is going to break open the results that you're getting from the communication that you're having. And so you can do it just through observation without ever mentioning stances, without ever naming it to that person.
And that is often the best way to go about it if you don't already know that these people know the Enneagram or are working with it. I often call it like an educated guess, right? You're gonna kind of go off what you see, and then you guess and check, right? Like you try something and you see how that played out, and if it was helpful or not helpful, and then you can use that information to help you further. But yeah, I think there's a lot here in the stances to kind of help you unpack some relational stuff. There's a lot of like attachment style things in some of this stuff, and there's lots of stuff to play into that you can dive into with stances. But that's all we've got for you today, right? Okay, cool. January 20th, 2024, we are hosting the Enneagram and Relationships Workshop here in Austin, Texas. All the information is down below with a link to register. When this episode goes live, you will have another either 3 or 10 days until
the early bird.
Yeah, until the early bird is over. So early bird ends December 15th of 2023. So sign up beforehand to save some dollars. We'd love to see you there.
There will definitely be some opportunities to dig into stances and to really roll your sleeves up in your own relational life and kind of look around and say like, what are the actionable steps in terms of what I know about stances? And lots more. So definitely sign up. And if you bring someone with you, they don't have to be your partner. They could be
a friend,
a friend.
Coworker.
There's a deal for a cheaper duo.
Pair.
That way you'll have someone you're in relationship with to have some of these conversations alongside.
And like call you out. And be like, that's
what I was thinking is for the assertive types. I was like, the thing you can do to support assertive types that we didn't mention is actually just call them on their shit. Because I feel like assertive types can take that in ways that the other two can't.
I would say that that's more true for 7s and 8s. I don't know that, unless you have a lot of relational trust with a 3, they're not going to vibe with that.
You're right. Okay.
Just to say that.
Yeah.
Because you say that because we do that with each other all the time. That is like the majority of our friendship, I think. If we were to like count out the time.
I won't like it, but I will digest it and action it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry about that. Derailed us.
Come to the workshop.
We're going
to have, by the next episode, we'll have the online registration ready to go. So if you're not in Austin, be on the lookout for that link that's going to come up. Don't forget to like and comment and share and subscribe. If you're listening to the audio version, please rate us in your podcast app.
Yes.
And then click that little the little arrow box button and share it with a friend that you think might find this useful. If you're watching on YouTube, let us know how we did. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. That does so much to help the channel. And share with some friends, right? Some folks that you're in relationship with that want to dive in and learn some stuff.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Sounds good.
Thank you all so much for listening and for being a part, and we'll see y'all in the next one.
Cheers.